Welcome to Real Talk with Roberta's House, where we want to get to the heart of the matter, HEART, healing grief through education, advocacy, resilience, and trauma-informed care. My name is Dr. Gregory Branch, and I'm the Vice President of Roberta's House.
Hi, my name is Matila, and I'm the Executive Director of Roberta's House. It is so nice to be here on the couch.
All right. You know, it's always wonderful to just kind of sit down and talk. A lot of times we're so busy and we're doing so many things and our paths cross all the time. But just to sit down and get to the heart of the matter is really wonderful. We have some new initiatives going on at Roberta's House. And one of them is clearly going to be the whole idea of the organization working with the opioid prevention. Now, everyone knows that Roberta's House is an expert in grief and bereavement. Mm-hmm. How do we get into the opioid space? Like, what is that? What's the connection between that and grief?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, Dr. Branch, and I'm not really sure if other members of the community are aware, but to be quite frank, we've always been in the opioid prevention space. Mm-hmm. We've always had service participants who have come to us who have experienced that type of loss, whether it be through a close person, a significant person, or just in the community, grieving the loss of community and the possibilities therein, especially with the issues that we're having in community around opioid use. But recently, Mayor Scott had given us an opportunity to be able to expand grief and bereavement services by offering us a position as a grantee under the Opioid Restitution Fund. Okay. And we're just really utilizing that opportunity not only to expand services, but speak to some of the needs in community around opioid prevention. So there's a number of different activities that we're going to be doing around supporting individuals who have expressed this loss, but also preventing more lives being lost in community and really alleviating the stigma around discussing death and loss as it pertains to opioid use. So we're really excited about what these opportunities can do for us expanding reach and increasing services in community that meet the needs of those that we serve.
So you mentioned the Opioid Restitution Fund, you mentioned the mayor, and this is all the wonderful stuff. I'm so glad, of course we're here at Roberta's House is glad for those fundings. What are some of the specific things we'll be doing with those funds at Roberta's House?
Well, primarily, Roberta's House's campus, both Baltimore City and Prince George's County, have become an ORP, and that's actually an opioid response program. Yes. So the first thing that we're able to do to provide service to individuals who may need it is to provide Narcan and other harm reduction tools to individuals who are using drugs so that we can make sure that even when they are in the midst of their use, that they can maintain safety and security as much as possible. We're also offering a number of education type-based services to really explore the relationship between grief and opioid use. We're going to be screening youth that are in our care for risk of other substance uses, and we're going to be providing a lot of grief support services, both clinical and peer support based, to help people who may be working with or who have experienced the loss of individuals related to the opioid pandemic, whether that be individuals who are in active recovery, partnering with drug treatment centers to offer services in-house around grief and bereavement, or it could just be community members coming to us and participating in services to help them explore and unpack some of the losses they may have experienced around the opioid pandemic. But for you, Dr. Branch, you've been a health officer in Baltimore County for a number of years, so I'm sure you've had a lot of experience with rolling out harm reduction programs and connecting with community members around opioid use. What do you think, in your opinion, is the biggest stigma that you see in community around opioid use?
That's a very interesting question. The biggest, I would have to say, quite frankly, that the stigma around it, I think, is that many people believe that opioid use is specifically and solely a choice and not a disease. Opioid misuse is actually a disease. It actually changes the fabric of your brain in regard to your response to those opioids and that whole addiction piece of that. And so if you understand it and think of it as a disease, I think many people are much more willing to understand it and appreciate the whole therapeutic approach to it. If you say it's just a choice, then you just blame the individual. But opioid misuse is like any other disease. That's the key. It's just like any other disease. Some people do very well on it. on the treatment, and then some people wax and wane, and they go back, and then they come forward, and they go back, and that's a part of the disease process. I liken it to, as an internist, I liken it to a person who may have hypertension and diabetes, obesity. Let's just say if you're a person who decides to have a 2-all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Now y'all know what he's talking about. That
a
great
large
big
fry,
man.
yes, right,
Yes.
a large fry.
And you can't forget the Diet Coke.
And a Diet Coke, right? So a person has that, right? And then 3 hours later, they wind up in the emergency room with a very, very high sugar of 900. While they're in the emergency room, there is no doubt in anybody's mind that they're going to get the insulin that they need. That's what we do. We treat the disease where it is. Now, that person wasn't supposed to have that. They chose to have that, but it was a part of their disease process, and we treat it. When I was training years ago, like 30 years ago, when a person who was in a methadone program being treated for opioid misuse, if they were to take heroin, we would report it back to the methadone clinic, and they would want to decrease the methadone, and they would want to penalize the person because we were thinking of it as a choice. But when you think about it as a disease, you want to actually meet them where they are. You want to educate them. You want to plant seeds in them to how they can actually get care and get help, and you want to provide them with the treatment that they need. And so I think it's once you start thinking about opioid misuse as a disease and not as a choice, I think it alleviates much of the stigma that we have now.
And thank goodness, I think the message is finally getting out there. I think through folks like you and other members in the community that are providing services to folks who may be struggling with drug use, the message around disease and treatment, I think, is finally starting to penetrate community. But there is a lot of talk around these principles of harm reduction, right? I think people are very familiar with treatment from a traditional standpoint, right? You see somebody maybe struggling with an issue around opioid use or some other form of disease around substance use, and you encourage them to go into treatment, right? Folks may not necessarily be familiar with harm reduction. Could you talk a little bit about what harm reduction is? I heard that you mentioned it a little bit in your response, but delve deeper for us a little bit. What is harm reduction?
Well, harm reduction basically understands that a person may not stop a behavior, but we want to have them decrease that behavior. We want to be able to prevent other diseases in that behavior. So let's just talk specifically about opioid use. So harm reduction, I may say to a person that we would like to have a needle exchange program. Now, that's something that Roberta's house does not do, and I understand that. But it's a part of harm reduction in that it's going to prevent the person from potentially getting HIV or a person getting hepatitis, right? So it reduces the harm of all the other diseases. A person may get Narcan training, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit too, but that's going to prevent the death of a person who will become overwhelmed with opioids, right? So you want to be able to give them some type of education for harm reduction to reduce the harm that they are giving to themselves. It didn't take it away, but it reduced the harm. And I always liken it to other disease processes. I had a patient in my practice years ago who had very high blood pressure. She came in with very high sugar. I mean, all her numbers were just out of whack. And I had said to her, I got you on all these medications. Your numbers are out of whack. What are you eating? Like I couldn't understand what was going on. And she said to me, I said, what did you have yesterday for dinner? That's what I kind of got to that. And she kind of didn't want to say it, but she told me the truth. And she said she had hog maws, she had chitlins, she had potato salad, and collard greens. And I said to her, don't you ever in your life make hog maws and chitlins, potato salad, and collard greens unless you bring me some. So we laughed, right? And she understood that I was on her side and I was working with her. And then I went straight into harm reduction. So I said to her, you can have, you ain't supposed to have it, but I can't stop you from eating it. So therefore you can have it once a year. So are you going to eat it during Thanksgiving? Are you going to have it during Christmas? or are you going to have it on New Year's? You got one holiday. She smiled, right? And she said, I understand. The next time she came in, her numbers were going down. Her numbers were going down. She was doing beautifully. She understood that concept of you can't really totally, completely indulge in that. And she chose that her day was going to be New Year's. That was going to be her day.
Right.
I didn't realize it, but she had made an appointment on January 2nd to see me. And guess what she brought in?
Hog maws, chitlins, potato salad,
and collard greens,
and you were the happiest doctor.
And I was like, oh my God,
doing rounds for
because I
that
hadn't
day.
had it in years, right? And so my point is the fact that that's a form of harm reduction, right? I am a doc. I'm a person who's supposed to say to you, let me get this mic. I'm a person who's supposed to say to you, you can't have it at all. But that's sometimes gets unreasonable. Like,
right.
Makes no sense.
And not culturally competent. I think what I loved about your example is that you're acknowledging not necessarily where she is in her food journey, but also where she is culturally. To have that type of food on New Year's Day, it's not just a celebration, but it's a recognition and a nod to her African American heritage. So the fact that you were able to recognize that and respond to her accordingly, that's powerful. I think in our support groups, we do a lot to share with individuals who may be experiencing grief, coping skills and coping mechanisms that can help them through that grief journey. But I think if we were honest with ourselves, we have to acknowledge that grief can be really rough for individuals. And sometimes individuals are using outside external substances to try to alleviate some of the emotional and physical pain and symptoms around grief. You know, we've done a lot of presentations on grief and its work on the body. So I think we're a bit familiar with harm reduction and kind of the way that you are describing it. I know that there's some tools in popular culture that some people are familiar with, medications and other things, especially Narcan, right? Narcan tends to be most associated with harm reduction for folks who know about it. Can you tell us a little bit more about Narcan? What is that? How does it work?
You know, it's interesting you talk about Narcan because many people have heard of it, but don't really know what it is. And so Narcan is a drug that reverses the effects of opioids. And one of the major effects of opioids is to stop a person from breathing. And that's what Narcan is going to do. It's going to reverse that. So when an opioid goes into your body, you have certain receptors in your brain, and they're called mu receptors. Think of the cow, mu, mu receptors. And the opioid sits on that mu receptor, and that basically tells that receptor to tell the person, stop breathing. And when you become overwhelmed with the opioids, you stop breathing. Now, what Narcan does is Narcan moves the opioid away, and it then sits on that same receptor. And so now the opioid can't sit there, the Narcan is there. And so the Narcan, by sitting there, basically tells a person, you should breathe.
Wow.
So what happens is it's great. It's a great effect, and it can actually work within a minute or two. Unfortunately, the Narcan is only short-lived. So the opioid is still hanging out there. The Narcan is short-lived. And then once the Narcan basically gets, quote, tired of sitting there, it moves off, and then the opioids can sit back on it. So we're able to reverse the effect of the opioids temporarily, which is wonderful because it gives us the opportunity to save that person's life at that particular time. That's why it's so important to have the Narcan. Now, Narcan has been out for decades and decades. What happens is the fact that people were dying in an abandoned building. People were dying in their home. People were dying on the street, right? And by having everybody carry around that Narcan, you squirt it up their nose, and basically you can save that person's life. And that's why it's so important. And that's a harm reduction, right? I'm not saying to you that you can't use it, although I want you to stop using opioids. I do want you to stop using opioids. We understand that. However, if you're going to use, then you should actually have another person around who has the opioids, who's able to give you that medication so that in the event that you were overwhelmed with opioids, you could then be saved. And that is the key to having all of this happen. We now have the community, the families, and everybody getting together to be able to help these people who are suffering from this disease. This is a public health emergency, and it will take the public to be able to deal with this emergency. We cannot look over there and just say, oh, it's just that person. I can't do nothing with them. They chose to do this. No, we're all in this. We are our brother's keeper when it comes to this. And it has happened to me many a times. While I was on the street. I was on the street in North Avenue. I was on the street on Edmondson Avenue. I was in different places. And guess what? I had to administer Narcan to somebody who I didn't know. But they were out. They weren't breathing. And when I gave them that Narcan, they started to breathe again. We were able to save that person's life. And that's what we're trying to do. Because the more times I could save your life, we have another chance and another chance and another chance and another chance to be able to get you to a point where you can actually come off of the opioids and actually live a very, very productive life.
Powerful. So how do people get access to this medication? How do people learn how to administer it if they want to kind of partner like you and save more lives?
Yeah, you can go to an opioid response program, and I'm going to tell you about one of them, and that's Roberta's house, right?
Yes, y'all.
So I think that you actually just look up Roberta's house, or you can go to a local health department. But I would say to you that you can go to a place like Roberta's house, www.robertashouse.org, go to our website, all that kind of stuff, and you can actually kind of click on there, find out more information. You can come in for training, and training is usually less than an hour that we can actually kind of show you how to do it. If you need to go learn very, very quickly, I can show you in probably 5 minutes how to do it. And we will give you the Narcan medication so that you could actually carry it around with you and you would actually have it. So I would just tell people, just call Roberta's house, just go to our website and you can get more information about the Narcan.
Yeah. Do we have any other harm reduction tools that we could offer community members?
We have a lot of harm reduction tools. We have tools like when we talk about testing the drug for opioids, right? That's fentanyl test strips. That's very, very important. Many people who are taking illicit drugs don't want an opioid. They may want cocaine. Now, I don't want them to take cocaine, but we know that there are people who have been taking cocaine or think they're taking cocaine, but in fact are taking not only cocaine, but an opioid. And they become overwhelmed, and then they die because of that. And they didn't want to die. They weren't trying to commit suicide or anything like that at all. They just got a batch of cocaine that happened to have fentanyl in it. They happen to have carfentanil in it. They happen to have an opioid in it. And so what we do is we actually give them a test kit that they learn how to test their drugs. And if they have a fentanyl or carfentanil opioid in it, the test kit will show them that, and then they can make a decision then. Do I not take this? Or do I take less of this? Or do I make sure that I have Narcan around and someone else around who will be able to revive me if something else happened? So that's a wonderful thing. And then a big thing about harm reduction is just education. Educating people. What we know is the fact that many people who are overdosing are people who have come out of a treatment program, may have come out of recent incarceration, or may have just come out of the hospital. And in their mind, they think they can take the same amount that they were taking before they went into that institution. But in fact, they can't. And so they take that very large dose, and then they're overwhelmed by it. And so we really want to make sure that those people understand that they need to get those fentanyl test strips. They need to get the Narcan. They need to talk to other people. And they need to get the people around them to help them. If you are a mother and you have a child who you know is on opioids or taking drugs, you should have Narcan. If you are a mortician and you know that you have the community coming in, somebody may go into your bathroom, right? And you should have the Narcan there. If you work at a grocery store, right? Anywhere where people are, and it doesn't make a difference if it's in the city, if it's in the county, if it's rural, if it's urban, everyone should always have that Narcan around because you never know who might become overwhelmed. And it's not only a person taking illicit drugs. I can have a person who's on an opioid for cancer, or who's on an opioid because of pain and they're given the medication by their doctor, they too can become overwhelmed. And so you really would like to have that medication around for anybody who stops breathing. It will not harm anybody if they're not overwhelmed with opioids, but it would definitely save a life if they are. You've heard it here today. Matila Sacker-Jones and Dr. Branch, Real Talk with Roberta's House, where we're going to get to the heart of the matter, healing grief through education, advocacy, resilience, and trauma-informed care.